Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and welcome to another edition of RegWatch on GFN.TV. For those of us living in the West, it's often difficult relating to the challenges of those living in low-income and middle-income countries, known as LMICs. While tobacco harm reduction advocates here do battle with overzealous regulators who seek to restrict nicotine and flavors in electronic nicotine delivery systems, THR advocates in LMICs fight the proliferation of toxic tobacco products and predatory business practices. Joining us today to talk through the challenges facing LMICs is Dr. Sudhanshu Patwardhan, a UK licensed medical doctor, nicotine expert, and health tech entrepreneur. Dr. Sood, thanks for coming back on the show.
Great to be back, Brent.
Before we dive into the global issues, what are your thoughts on developments in the UK and the move to ban disposables and a potential restriction on flavors?
It is quite unfortunate that it has come to this, and it just reminds me how any good policy needs to be supported with good enforcement. And this is where perhaps the liberal policy of the UK, what I would like to call enlightened in the context of tobacco harm reduction, allowing the use of electronic cigarettes as another cessation aid for current smokers, has spilled over into a market where those who are non-smokers and especially youth have picked up e-cigarettes in large numbers. And that's a matter of great concern. So the response of the policymakers is but natural. And that's where we have landed now. And that has a serious implication in terms of future reduction in tobacco consumption rates. And I'm quite saddened by that, but I understand the context in which this policy change has been brought in.
Considering the UK, as you said, enlightened, I mean, they're renowned around the world for their tobacco harm reduction strategy. Has this been a disappointment?
No, as I said, it's not a disappointment. It is the natural course in some cases of how there is a mismatch between policy and how regulations come out of policies and then are enforced in the marketplace, and how a lot of forces start playing economic, vested interests, human behavior, and these lead to an outcome which is not exactly what the policy had foreseen or envisaged.
So 2 more questions on this. One, is it actually viable to ban disposables? And on the other side, what do you think could happen with a potential flavor ban?
Let me answer the disposable ban's viability. And look, we cannot predict how the marketplace will react. If you look at how in the space of combustible tobacco products, cigarettes in the UK, over the years, with the increase in the price of the pack, how smuggled cigarettes came from Europe, Western and then Eastern Europe, you can see that despite being an island, still, unless there is proper enforcement and a lot of investment in at the borders as well as in terms of the trading standards, people in the marketplace, it is very possible for banned products or contraband products, illicit products to enter the market and be sold. The price differential, the demand for these products ultimately determines whether or not they're available in the market for those who need them, as well as for those who do not need them but want them. And so, will this ban on disposables work? I sincerely hope it does to achieve what it is supposed to achieve, but it will also have its unintended consequences, and it may purely not work because of pure economic principles.
Let me ask you, Sood, what is the public perception of vaping in the UK?
I cannot speak on behalf of the entire UK public. It's a very heterogeneous group. What I can say for sure is electronic cigarettes became very common, very available over the last decade plus. There was a moment in time when the public health community, generally at a sort of policy level, at least, was very pro e-cigarettes, witnessed with the Public Health England reports around vaping, the Royal College of Physicians reports, and to an extent, some amount of positive media coverage around electronic cigarettes. But that narrative has changed in the last couple of years. And if you look at the amount of negative media around electronic cigarettes, be it the science around it, be the suspected worries about the toxic potential of the vapor, the concerns about environmental harms from disposable e-cigarettes, particularly, and the entire narrative has gone into that of these are dangerous products. It is not necessarily written like that, but it's kind of almost the unfinished part of the sentence is perhaps worse than cigarettes, and that's the thing that kind of lingers on in people's minds. Now, people like me, doctors working in tobacco harm reduction, tobacco control, of course, look at the science around e-cigarettes and say, hey, you know what, this is a product that's going to offer one more option for current smokers to quit their risky tobacco habit. And so I look at it with a lot of positivity, knowing the science behind it. But that sentiment may not be necessarily shared by those who are not in the know and are only seeing media buzz around it, which is all very negative.
What's your perception of the misperceptions about vaping, so, say, on a global level?
Oh, they're rampant and prevalent. And it's quite unfortunate because what happens is that the narrative, as I said earlier, is hijacked by one or two scientific publications which are promoted by the researchers for their own vested interests. And it leads to a point where the actual true science regarding a well-regulated product category. In the case of UK, for example, there are enough regulations in place to ensure that you will not have certain chemicals added to the cigarette, for example, diacetyl. And there's a requirement for companies to report the chemistry data from what's in the liquid to what's in the aerosol of the product. So knowing that and the amount of risk assessment of the chemicals that are created as part of the vaporization process, I believe that there is enough science to say that these are significantly less risky than the current alternative, which is combustible tobacco. But this is not necessarily shared by the rest of a huge chunk of the society, again, because of media and the kind of narrative. So my perception is, of course, I know the science behind this. I do my job of looking and evaluating it on a regular basis. I'm not stuck in time when I had done something and then I'm okay, I think that's what it is. I do look at existing and evolving data, but the society is not necessarily catching up, and or it's catching up on the wrong things or only on partial biased media.
Speaking of science, and in fact, actually, policy goes right with it, certainly in this area, you have a ton of experience. Please fill our audience in a bit on your background and why you're so passionate about helping people quit risky forms of tobacco.
Well, thanks for picking on my favorite phrase, which is risky forms of tobacco. And this is something that I take immense pride, but also I'm privileged to be able to push for this way of thinking around tobacco products. And let me explain why. I grew up in India. I trained to be a medical doctor in India. I was quite fortunate to have been exposed to the world of genomics and bioinformatics, which led me to go to the US. And I was on the west coast of the US in California for a couple of years, training in my postgraduate studies in bioinformatics and biosciences and pharmaceuticals research. And a short stint at Pfizer in La Jolla gave me this sort of flavor of big pharma and massive budgets for research, very exciting stuff that led to Singapore with Eli Lilly and so on. So that career trajectory has been fascinating personally for me in terms of exposure to cutting edge science and seeing how research can be harnessed to do new drug discoveries. Now, the transition point came from Singapore to the UK when I took a job with a small company based in Cambridge in the UK called Advanced Technologies Cambridge, which was, I knew it was a subsidiary of British American Tobacco, but they wanted a scientist who could help them create the baseline for assessing future less risky tobacco or nicotine products. And it all sounded quite from a fantasy film. But I came and joined the company in 2005 and did not look back because what it opened my eyes to through my own research, starting with what I call almost the Bible of tobacco harm reduction, the Institute of Medicine report called Clearing the Smoke. what that opened my eyes to, I in fact used that as my prep material for the interview with BAT in 2005. And what it opened my eyes to was my own lack of understanding of what is it in the tobacco products that causes the harm. Now, as a medical doctor in training in India in the late 90s, I was quite fortunate, misfortunate to see the harms of tobacco, smoked or smokeless tobacco. So cigarettes, bidis, primarily the smoked forms of tobacco available in India, and gutka, mishri, khani, zarda. These are local variants of smokeless or oral tobacco products widely available in India. In fact, to the extent that out of these sort of give or take nearly 300 million tobacco users in India, 100 million tobacco users use combustible tobacco, be it cigarettes or bidis, and the other 200 million use oral tobacco products. That also is the reason why India, sadly, is the capital of oral cancers in the world, because that oral tobacco harms the lining of the oral cavity and causes and increases the risk of oral cancer significantly. So when I talk about risky tobacco products and say that my mission is to ensure that people who consume these products need to be given help to quit these products. And it cannot be and should not be in the form of just telling them to quit. There is a chemical that's been consumed through any of these products, and that's nicotine. Nicotine is dependent causing. It is the reason why people consume it to a large extent. And just expecting consumers of these risky tobacco products to just quit one day is expecting too much. You do not expect that with people who are addicted to other addictive substances. At no point in this entire trajectory of my own thinking, my own evolution as a medical doctor, as a researcher, uh, I feel that at no point did I feel that, oh, the consumer is an addict, so we should just let them be and get on with it and just find new fancy products to sell to new consumers. And so I think that has been the kind of ethical underpinning from all my work, be it in the times at British American Tobacco, but also afterwards, which is the last 5 years now. So I may have rambled on in the answer, Brent, but I think the point is my journey has got me from being a medical doctor, done some research in pharmaceuticals, in tobacco, advised BAT to get into electronic cigarettes in 2012 with their first acquisition of an electronic cigarette company that led to the first medically licensed e-cigarette product, and then subsequently worked on standards for quality and safety of e-cigarettes with the British Standards Institution. And for the last 5 years plus, working in the area of what I finally think is where I've kind of landed, which is consumers, as industry would like to call them, or patients, as doctors would like to call them. Uh, Forget the labeling and the branding. It's about that person who is consuming risky forms of tobacco needs help to quit. Uh, I like to say this that those who quit cold turkey, yeah, that is very overrated. Everyone knows somebody who quit cold turkey. That doesn't mean cold turkey is a successful way of quitting, at least not for a majority of people who consume tobacco. So current tobacco consumers need help to quit. It's my job to ensure that they get that help. That help could be in the form of less risky nicotine alternatives, but also advice from their trusted source of advice, which is medical doctors. So that's where we've kind of finally landed, where clinicians, physicians become the source of accurate science-based advice. And hopefully that'll change the way tobacco consumption in the world happens. And hopefully it leads to people not consuming risky forms of tobacco anymore in the next few years, and changes how that impacts the public health outcomes based on that.
Often, when we look at tobacco control and everything it does and what it stands for, it just seems to me to be people control. I mean, that's really what tobacco control is it not, in a way, controlling people? And my question is that involves a certain amount of bullying. And here in the West, I can speak for myself for being a smoker for 25 years. We kind of felt bullied to quit. And, the stick here is that we did quit using vapes, and now they're trying to take that away. I mean, it's a nightmare. But is tobacco control capable of utilizing its bullying tactics on 100 or 300 million people living in India?
Well, let's take a step back, Brent. They should not be even using that on people in smaller populations with smaller incidence of tobacco use either. So I'm very sorry that you have experienced that as an ex-tobacco user. Uh,
Well, I think
and
they're still causing harm today. I think what they're doing to people who use vaping products for tobacco harm reduction, I believe tobacco control is continuing their bullying.
No, absolutely. Look, I think that's an extension of the same kind of psyche, right? If you think of what they think worked for those millions of smokers in the Western world or the global North, is that they think that by them, and by them, I'm kind of putting this into a big bucket of people, which is not necessarily so. They're not heterogeneous. There are a lot of
Sure.
people in the tobacco control world, in the public health world, who have their heart is in the right place. But oftentimes, and I've written about this more recently regarding many of them come from a public health background, which I respect a lot, but they often do not have the experience as clinicians of treating patients who are at a one-to-one level. So individuals' needs, individuals' challenges with quitting tobacco are often not appreciated. So they will look at this entire block of people as a homogeneous sort of monolith of some sort and say, all of you guys, you've been smoking for a long time. We have been putting these advertisements out. We have put on your pack. We have put everywhere that you should stop smoking. We have raised the taxes to like through the roof now, and yet you smoke. You addict. This is the kind of mindset they end up having, and unfortunately, this is then compounded or coupled with what public health likes to kind of find a reason behind this, right? So they've through the tobacco industry's own actions. The tobacco control community have found something to latch on, which is that is the vector. Vector is this concept in communicable disease where something causes the disease. So let's say mosquito is causing malaria. So it's a vector because it's transmitting this Plasmodium vivax or falciparum parasite. So that's a vector. The tobacco industry is a vector. So they have found the vector. They've found a disease, which is lung cancers, oral cancers, cardiovascular disease, stroke, whatever, COPD. And in all of this, they kind of almost forgotten, or if they have, even if they think about consumers, they think of them as addicts. And they say, you know what? They're addicts. So we're going to keep on bullying them. Now, this is my take on it, right? So you don't necessarily need to agree with this. And I'm at no point saying that the tobacco control community's lost it. It's more of somehow they have lost sight of that individual within that broad consumer community. And these are the same individuals, a significant number of whom, at least more than 50%, die prematurely because of their consumption of these tobacco products. So they have to be given support and not just left to die. But that's exactly what the attitudes and some of the behaviors of the tobacco control community lead to. And this is something that I have a serious objection to.
Sood, do you take Big Tobacco's stated commitment to tobacco harm reduction seriously? Or do you think they're legitimately involved in the tobacco harm reduction movement?
These are different questions. The latter is what I can immediately answer, saying that they are definitely in the space of tobacco harm reduction. I've seen it from within the industry while I was there 5 years ago. And I wouldn't doubt that intent. And look, it is not an altruistic intent at all, or not an altruistic intent only. It's an existential thing. So let's not kind of get emotional about it. It's about an industry which needs to transform to survive. And so if they do it, well, good, they better do it. Otherwise, their shareholders will punish them for not doing it. So do you see what I mean? That I think, does it really matter if I think whether they are or they are not? But they better do it, because that's a reason for the CEO and the management and the leadership and all of them to survive in the jobs, because the shareholders will not accept anything but.
Dr. Sood, I know you'll be speaking on a panel at the upcoming Global Forum on Nicotine, the annual conference on safer nicotine products and tobacco harm reduction. GFN 24 runs from this June 13 to 15 in Warsaw, Poland. First, let me ask you, why is an event like GFN important? And second, please share with us the results from the workshop you convened and chaired at GFN 2023.
So yeah, I'm super excited to attend the GFN once again in Warsaw, and it is quite personal as well as professional for me to be there. I was involved in helping the organizers set up the conference when it first started more than a decade ago, and I've seen it evolve and only get better over the time. So why is such a conference important? Look, there are many different conferences in the space of tobacco control, tobacco harm reduction, and each one I believe has a role to play. So this is not about whether one is better than the other, but what is the unique selling point of GFN, the Global Forum on Nicotine, in my view, is that it's got a very healthy mix of industry, consumer advocates, scientists, and tobacco harm reduction advocates. Now, that combination, along with a few from the investment community, journalists coming from around the world, and a kind of healthy dialogue, respectful dialogue among all of them, makes it makes it quite unique in that sense. Because there are conferences, especially in the tobacco control world, where the tobacco industry is not allowed. There are conferences in similar conferences where I was recently at a conference in Scotland, tobacco control, tobacco science conference, and there were hardly any consumer advocates there. And I thought, hang on, 1,000 plus people from mostly the global north, mostly from the developed nations, talking about the lives and futures of nearly a billion people who live in the global south, in the LMICs. Neither the scientists from those regions are represented in this conference, nor are the consumers about which the science is being done on. So it felt like a big gap. A big part of this is addressed at the GFN in terms of the consumers who are drawn from around the world, and tobacco companies who should be, at least in theory, doing more to bring safer nicotine alternatives to the low and middle income countries. So GFN is a place to go for that. And it's also a chance for people like me to keep on challenging the organizers and the industry folks there to say they need to do more than what they're doing. And they'll be perhaps more receptive for me to say that to them there than in a conference where they're not even allowed to be at.
So last year, the panel and workshop kind of thing that you hosted, and please tell us about your colleague you were involved with that, was called Tobacco Industry Transformation. Is it really reaching LMICs? Please fill us in.
Well, it was an idea that came from my work in this space over the last few years now. And I like to believe that I, I have landed this role, or perhaps grabbed this role personally without nobody essentially or necessarily offering it to me. And I take it very seriously, of holding the industry to account, but not by banishing them, not by saying that because you have done this, you're not now allowed to engage and interact with me or anybody else that I'm interacting with. It's the exact opposite. Back to the earlier point I mentioned about the industry is a legitimate industry. They need to transform for their own existence. My role when I was within the industry, but now that I'm outside, I have even more credibility and independence to check, challenge, and cajole and nudge and bully, to use your previous word, the industry to get their act together in the interest of all their stakeholders, not just their shareholders, if that makes sense. So the shareholders, of course, want return on investment, but there is also a bunch of other stakeholders who matter, including the people they sell their products to. And back to the data, 80% of the consumers of risky forms of tobacco products live in the low and middle income countries. So if the tobacco industry is not going to them, I would genuinely challenge their intent and say, well, hang on, then are you just doing it for a bunch of wealthier consumers in the Western world? And how does this reflect on your role as a change agent, as an industry in transformation? But also, why are you forgetting those 80% folks in the LMICs? And is this not going to lead to a widening of the inequity gap? And these are the kind of questions I wanted to ask the industry, but also other stakeholders who were invited on the panel. So I had a very interesting, very smart bunch of people on the panel. One from the tobacco industry, One a consumer advocate from Africa, and another who has experience in the tobacco industry, but now is an independent consultant and solid experience in supply chains and how industries procure their products, but also how tobacco and nicotine supply is changing over the years and how that will change access to safer nicotine products at affordable prices. So a lot of different things come into picture, as you can see here. And that panel was it was an hour long, and all the three panelists, but also the folks in the audience, were really into the topic. And it was a new thing for them because, again, a lot of tobacco harm reduction conversation happens in the context of what's happening in the UK, what's happening in the US, what's New Zealand done today, what's the rate of decline of cigarettes sold in Japan. And at no point we hear about what's happening in China, what's happening in India, what's happening in Indonesia and South Africa. And except for draconian announcements of something is banned in this country, something else is something. So I would like a better discussion about this. And I'm going to challenge, and I will continue challenging tobacco companies, transnational global tobacco companies, on whether and how, what they are doing to bring their safer nicotine alternatives to these markets.
Let me ask you, is it a challenge, the fact that in some of these markets, maybe many of them, it's not the multinationals that are servicing that market, it's national companies, maybe potentially owned by local government, national governments, and are they less inclined to be, transforming?
Absolutely, you got it spot on. And I think if you have read the article which I and one of the attendees in the conference session last year, Peter Voister, he and I wrote this article in the Tobacco Reporter last month as a kind of follow-up to the 2023 GFN session that we mentioned just now. We talk about how specific countries and national monopolies in tobacco, or the stake of governments in national companies, tobacco companies, uh, kind of muddies the water, but also brings into doubt whether those countries are actually keen to achieve reduction in harms from tobacco in for their own populations. Now, bear in mind, most, if not all, of these countries are signatories of the FCTC, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. So, be it India, China, South Africa, and yet in some of these countries, you will see a certain amount of stake in the national or the local tobacco company that a government has. In the case of China, it is 100%. In the case of India, the Indian government, through its various organizations, owns more than 20% in ITC, the largest Indian cigarette manufacturer. So this picture is quite shocking, surprising, but also means that consumers in those countries are faced with not much choice, and there are very restrictive rules in terms of foreign investment in these countries, which means that foreign companies selling tobacco or nicotine products cannot just launch products there. And these are policies devised for specific reasons, but that does not necessarily mean that those consumers in those countries actually get access to safer alternatives.
Sud, I have a question for you. Tell us, what is the bottom of the pyramid?
I have borrowed this concept from what C.K. Prahlad, a management guru in the 1990s, wrote about the markets in the developing nations then. So the idea is very simple, very elegant, I think. And that may be something that the tobacco industry, if they had the opportunity and the permissions to market in those countries, they should grab it. And the idea is this. In India, I mentioned there are nearly 300 million tobacco users of risky forms of tobacco products. And the market is quite diverse. There are those who can afford. So India has some of the highest numbers of billionaires in the world, and so does China, which has another 300 million users of cigarettes. So, and there is Indonesia with another 70 million tobacco users. So even between these countries, you've got nearly 700 or 800 million people consuming tobacco. Now, not all of them can afford a $10 or a $15 cigarette pack. These are the prices you normally get. And companies make a lot of money despite the high taxes and the tax burden in the Western world. Companies make a lot of profit per pack of cigarettes. They cannot just purely based on economics and the finances and the pricing of the product, they cannot make that much profit per pack in an India or a China. Yeah. So naturally, the inclination of a business person would be, I'm not going to make so much money as I'm going to make in the UK and the US and Japan. So I might rather focus my energies, marketing spend, and trying to make more money in the Western world because it's a highly profitable market. But the idea, the bottom of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid idea is simple that look at a pyramid. The base is pretty wide, which means per pack, you may not make that much money. But the scale that you're going to achieve purely because of the sheer number of people there. So if UK's population is 65 million people, of which only 6.5, 7 million, and only is just to give a context, it is a lot of people though, but on 6.5 million of those 65 million in the UK smoke cigarettes, India's 1.4 billion population has nearly 300 million tobacco users. That's a lot of people. Not all of them, most of them can't afford a $10 pack, but they can definitely, just by the numbers, if you multiply a much cheaper product, cheaper, safer alternative, by the way, and sold to those millions, can still make profit for these companies. So my argument there regarding the base of the pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid is this: don't ignore LMIC tobacco user populations for selling your safer nicotine alternatives just because they can't afford, not all of them, but a huge chunk of them can't afford your high priced, safer alternatives. Go with lower priced options. Do innovation that is relevant to those markets. A simple example of the idea then, not in the context of tobacco, was a shampoo bottle can be a few pounds, few dollars maybe. Yeah, that would translate into a few hundred rupees in India. And maybe not every person can afford that much in one go. So the idea was to then say, okay, you know what, can a Unilever or a Procter & Gamble put their shampoo in small sachets of 2 rupee or 5 rupee each? And so somebody who needs to have a shampoo can still get that, can have that little piece of consumeristic heaven, and yet be able to afford it. And so that's the kind of idea that go for the base of the pyramid. There's a lot of people there, but price your products, package your products in a way that is accessible to the consumer, make it affordable. I wouldn't go as far as saying make it available in smaller packs. I'm not a big supporter of, making single stick cigarettes, for that matter, available to smokers. But if you're talking about safer nicotine alternatives in a regulated way for current tobacco users, I would say find innovative ways of getting the safer products to those consumers. And there is money to be made there. So if there was an argument that, hey, why should we do it? We are not an altruistic organization. We are just a commercial entity. I would say, you know what? There's money to be made there, and you will get the goodwill and blessings of a billion people there. So go for that.